A man walks into a room where his future is being decided. He has prepared for weeks. He knows the material cold. His thinking is sharp, and his idea is genuinely good. The kind of idea that, if it lands, changes the trajectory of everything that follows. But something else is happening in that room before he opens his mouth. Something that runs faster than conscious thought and operates below the level of any deliberate decision. Every person across the table from him is performing an assessment that will be complete before he finishes his first sentence. And the data driving that assessment has almost nothing to do with what he is about to say. It has everything to do with how he looks, how he moves, how he occupies the space, what his presence communicates before he has communicated anything intentionally. His shoes are worn. His jacket fits badly. There is a looseness to the way he stands that suggests he is uncertain about whether he belongs in this room. And in the 2 seconds it takes for that data to be processed, unconsciously, automatically, with no malice and no conscious deliberation, the outcome is largely determined. His words will be heard. But they will be heard through a filter of diminished credibility that he created with his presentation before his presentation began. The people across the table will not be able to fully explain afterward why the pitch didn't quite land, why the idea felt less compelling than it sounded on paper, why they decided not to move forward. They will use the language of instinct. Something felt off. They just weren't sure. That's not a story. That is a mechanism. And it operates in every room where something real is at stake. Machiavelli understood this with a kind of clarity that comes from watching power operate at close range over many years. He was not a powerful man himself, not in the sense of commanding armies or governing territories. He was an observer, a chronicler, a man whose access to the powerful gave him a view that few people in his era possessed. And what he observed, documented with the unflinching precision that would eventually get his books banned by the Catholic Church, was this: reality is almost never evaluated on its own terms. It is filtered through appearance first, and if the appearance fails, reality never receives a hearing. He wrote it plainly in The Prince. Everyone sees what you appear to be, but few experience what you really are. This line is quoted often and processed rarely, because what it actually means is genuinely uncomfortable. It means that your competence, your intelligence, your genuine capability, the things you have actually worked to develop, exist behind a gate. And the gate is your presentation. If the gate is locked against you, your substance waits behind it indefinitely, unseen, unheard, unvalued. Cesare Borgia understood this in the operational sense, not as a philosophical observation, but as a tool to be deployed deliberately. In the period when he was consolidating power in central Italy, he approached every significant meeting as a staging problem, before it was a negotiation problem. His reception hall was arranged so that visitors entering from outside were temporarily disoriented by the shift in light, while he sat at the far end in perfect clarity and composure. His household staff wore uniforms that exceeded the quality of anything the visitors brought with them. The food at his table was intentionally restrained, not because he lacked the resources for extravagance, but because the restraint of a man who clearly could afford excess communicates something that excess itself cannot. It communicates that he has nothing to prove, that impressing you is simply not a priority. Machiavelli watched these meetings. He documented what he observed afterward, and his observation was direct. Before a single word of the actual business was spoken, the architecture of the environment had already established who held the authority in the room. The ambassadors who came prepared to negotiate found themselves in the psychological position of people seeking favor. The choreography of the space had accomplished what an hour of argument could not. That principle, that influence is established before the conversation begins. is the one that most people never fully absorb. We operate as though persuasion happens in the exchange, in the quality of our reasoning, in the force of our arguments. And sometimes it does, but the conditions under which that reasoning is heard, the degree of benefit of the doubt the audience extends, the threshold they apply before skepticism activates, all of this is determined in the first assessment. And the first assessment is visual. Social psychology has documented this so thoroughly and so consistently that the only remarkable thing about the findings is how resistant people are to accepting them. The same words, the same ideas, the same arguments, delivered by someone whose presentation signals authority versus someone whose presentation signals uncertainty, produce dramatically different responses. The authority gets compliance and consideration. The uncertainty gets resistance and scrutiny. Same content, same delivery. The container is the only variable, and the container determines the outcome. Joshua Bell, one of the foremost violinists in the world, performed for 43 minutes in a Washington, D.C. metro station during a morning commute. He played some of the most technically demanding and emotionally complex pieces in the classical repertoire. He played on an instrument worth $3.5 million. Over 1,000 people passed by. Fewer than 10 stopped for more than a minute. He collected $32. 2 nights before, he had performed to a sold-out theater where the cheapest available seat was $100. Same musician, same instrument, same music. In the concert hall, he looked an occupied space the way a world-class performer is expected to. In the metro, he looked like every other person playing for spare change. And people made the assessment before their ears could override it. They walked past genius because the packaging did not tell them to stop. This is not a cautionary tale about the Philistinism of commuters. It is a precise demonstration of a mechanism that operates universally, at every level of human interaction, across every domain where something real is being decided. Appearance determines the allocation of attention. Attention is the prerequisite for everything else. Without it, the content, however extraordinary, has no path to influence. Now, the deeper application of this principle, the one that Machiavelli was describing, and that most people who have encountered his work incompletely tend to miss, is that this is not fundamentally about clothing. Clothing is the most obvious and most easily addressed layer. Beneath it is something more structural, the total presentation of a person across every dimension through which they communicate before they speak. Voice is presentation, the voice that rushes, that fills silence with unnecessary explanation, that rises in pitch at the end of statements as though seeking confirmation, broadcasts a specific signal. It says, "I'm not certain I should be here. I'm aware that I might be questioned, and I am preemptively managing the anticipated challenge." A voice that is measured, that pauses without anxiety, that allows silence to exist without filling it, broadcasts something entirely different. It says, "I am not in a hurry, because I am not in a position where hurry is necessary." The difference is not volume, and it is not confidence in the performed sense. It is the behavioral expression of someone who has not organized their existence around the approval of whoever happens to be present. Posture is presentation. The body communicates rank in ways that precede language by millions of years. Contraction, the taking up of less space than is available, is the primal signal of subordination. Expansion, the unhurried occupation of the space you actually occupy, is its opposite. These signals are processed so fast and so automatically that the people receiving them have no conscious awareness of doing so. They simply find themselves in a particular relationship with the person across from them, a relationship of relative rank that was negotiated before either of them decided anything deliberately. Timing is presentation. The person who responds to every message immediately, who is available at all hours, who says yes to every request without evident friction. That person has communicated, through the behavioral arithmetic of their availability, that their time costs nothing. And if their time costs nothing, they cost nothing. The powerful, whether by design or by the genuine reality of competing demands, are slow. Their responses arrive after a delay that communicates wait. The consideration their attention represents is made palpable by the fact that their attention is not automatic. When you receive it, you register it as something worth having received. Price is presentation. A consultant I observed in an industry adjacent to my own built his practice from a position of no institutional credentials, no famous early clients, no advantages that the conventional wisdom of his field would have recognized as meaningful. He understood one thing that his competitors, many of whom had the credentials he lacked, did not. His fee was not just a transaction. It was a signal. When he charged rates that were reasonable by the standards of his market, he received reasonable treatment. Clients who questioned his recommendations, delayed their decisions, treated him as one option among many. When he raised his rates significantly, without changing his underlying service, the quality of the treatment he received changed in proportion. Clients listened more carefully. They implemented faster. They referred him into networks that his previous rate had not accessed. The number on the invoice was doing work that no certification could do, because it was operating on the layer where first assessments are made. It told people, before they had experienced his work, how to categorize him, and they categorized him accordingly. This is the mechanism Machiavelli was describing when he wrote that men judge more by their eyes than by their hands. Eyes are fast, holistic, and nearly irreversible in their initial verdict. Hands, the direct experience of what someone can actually do, require time, access, and a threshold of sustained engagement that is only granted to people who have already passed the eye test. You cannot get to the hands without passing the eyes, and the eyes make their determination in seconds. There is a specific cruelty in this that is worth sitting with honestly, because it explains something that ruins people and never announces itself as the reason. The person who is financially struggling has, at the precise moment when their presentation matters most, the least capacity to invest in it. The resources that would allow them to signal stability are the resources they do not have. So they enter the rooms where their trajectory is being determined, looking like what they are, under-resourced, strained, without the external markers that would command the benefit of the doubt, and they are treated accordingly. And the treatment confirms and compounds the underlying condition. They are not given the opportunity that would have allowed them to change what their presentation communicates, because their presentation did not signal that they were the kind of person opportunities should be extended to. Machiavelli wrote about fortune as a river that floods without warning and destroys everything in its path. His prescription was not to wait for calmer water. It was to build the structures before the flood that will make you survivable when it arrives. In the context of presentation and perception, the levee is built before you need it. The investment in how you appear, how your environment reads, how your voice sounds, how your timing signals weight. These are made when the pressure to make them is lowest, so that when the moment arrives where they matter most, they are already in place. Most people invert this. They plan to invest in their presentation after things improve, after the next raise, after the next client, after the next phase of the project. And the presentation in its current state continues to communicate the message that prevents the improvement they are waiting for before they address the presentation. This is a trap with no external lock. It can only be opened from inside. And the key is the recognition that the presentation is not the reward for having arrived. It is the infrastructure that makes arriving possible. Let me be honest about something that I have spent real time being uncomfortable with, because I think the discomfort is informative. Everything in this video describes a world that should not work the way it works. The man with the scuffed shoes and the brilliant idea should be heard. The violinist in the metro should stop traffic. The consultant with no credentials but genuine expertise should succeed on the quality of his thinking. These things should be true, and they are not reliably true. And the response to that gap between what should be and what is determines almost everything about whether you are effective in the world as it actually operates, or effective only in the world as you believe it should operate. Machiavelli was explicit about this distinction. In chapter 15 of The Prince, he writes that there is such a gap between how men live and how they ought to live, that whoever abandons what is done in favor of what ought to be done will learn his ruin rather than his preservation. He is not celebrating the gap. He is describing it with the honesty of someone who has chosen to be useful rather than comfortable. And he is pointing out that the man who insists on engaging with the world as it ought to be, rather than as it is not being moral. He is being ineffective. And ineffectiveness, in Machiavelli's framework, is the one unforgivable failure. The practical application of this principle operates in 3 layers. The first is the visible layer: what you wear, how your physical environment is arranged, the specific signals that communicate care, intentionality, and a relationship with your own presentation that suggests someone who takes seriously how they are received. This layer is the most immediately actionable and the most commonly discussed, which is why it is also the most commonly addressed superficially. You do not need to spend beyond your means. You need to spend intentionally within them. One well-fitting jacket communicates more than 3 that fit poorly. An environment that is orderly and considered communicates more than an expensive one that is chaotic. The principle is always intentionality over extravagance. The second layer is behavioral: the posture, the timing, the voice, the management of availability. These are harder to address because they require changing patterns that are deeply embedded and largely automatic. But they are addressable through sustained attention. The practice of pausing before responding. The practice of allowing silence in conversation rather than filling it reflexively. The practice of moving through a room at a pace that communicates you are not in a hurry to be somewhere other than where you are. These behaviors, practiced consistently, restructure how you are perceived at a level that clothing cannot reach. Because clothing communicates what you have, behavior communicates who you are. The third layer is environmental in the broader sense, the design of every context in which you are encountered before you are encountered directly. Your digital presence, the quality of written communication that arrives before you do, the spaces you invite people into, whether physically or conceptually. Borgia's reception hall was the Renaissance version of a principle that applies with equal force to the contemporary contexts where assessments are made. Every dimension of how you are first encountered communicates something about how you should be categorized. And the categorization happens fast, with limited information, based on whatever data is available. You control more of that data than you typically exercise the discipline to control. The Vienna Summit in 1961 is not primarily remembered as a demonstration of presentation theory. It is remembered as a geopolitical event with serious consequences. But buried in the historical record of that meeting is a detail that bears directly on what Machiavelli was describing 5 centuries earlier. Kennedy arrived physically diminished, suffering from a back condition that affected his posture and his movement. Khrushchev was attuned to physical signals in the way that all experienced political operators are, because physical signals communicate what carefully managed words conceal. He read Kennedy's physical presentation and drew conclusions about the disposition of the man inside it. Those conclusions informed the decisions he made in the months that followed. An entire sequence of international crises was shaped, in part, by the assessment made in the first minutes of a meeting, based on how one man's body communicated his condition before his words communicated his position. The scale is different. The principle is identical. You are not a Renaissance prince. You are not a Cold War president. But you are playing the same game at the scale of your own life. In every room where something real is at stake. In every interaction where a decision about you is being made. In every context where your trajectory is being influenced by people who will form their view of you before they have any basis for forming a view of you. And the outcome of those assessments is determined before you speak, by what they see, by what your presence communicates, by whether the story your appearance tells is one that earns you the benefit of the doubt or costs you access before you have demonstrated anything. Control the story, not through deception, through intention, through the deliberate, strategic management of every dimension of how you are first encountered, through the recognition that perception is architecture, and architecture is built, or it is what happens by default, and what happens by default to most people does not serve them. Machiavelli's observation from 1513 remains the most precise description of this mechanism that anyone has produced. Everyone sees what you appear to be, but few experience what you really are. And those who do experience what you really are will never get the chance if what you appear to be closes the door before they reach it. That is the cost. And no one will tell it to you plainly. They will simply stop calling. They will simply stop inviting. They will simply move on, and you will not know why. You will explain it with other reasons: competition, timing, luck, the randomness of who gets chosen. And some of those explanations will be partially correct. But underneath them, operating silently and consistently, will be the assessment that was made before anyone had the information to make a considered judgment. The assessment that your presentation made for you. The assessment you did not intend, but communicated anyway. Build the presentation before you need it. Control what they see before they see you. Make the first assessment the one that opens doors, rather than closes them. This is not vanity. This is the management of the one variable that is more upstream than any other in the sequence that determines what the world gives you. The cloth, as they said in Florence, makes the monk. Not because the cloth is the monk, but because no one waits for the prayer before they decide whether the monk is worth listening to.